This is 91.3 FM, WCUW in Worcester, Massachusetts, the Dr. Chris Radio of Horror Show here on the Radio of Horror Network and on WCUW in Worcester, Massachusetts, celebrating the 11th anniversary of the show tonight. Back in October 15th, 2007, we launched Radio of Horror from the Rock and Shock Horror Convention, which was happening in downtown Worcester today, this whole weekend, actually. So thank you to everybody I ran into who remembered Radio of Horror was on the air tonight, and thank you for tuning in to our new time slot of 10 p.m., which we are under extra restrictions for language, so everyone be very careful. Tonight on the show, from this amazing, fully funded documentary, which is currently still on Kickstarter, and it's got 20, 19, 18, depending on what day that we stick this up online, days to go, from In Search of Darkness, the definitive horror documentary, which I am helping out with and doing stuff with. We have Heather Wixon.
Hello.
We have Robin Block.
Hello there.
Hello. And we have Jessica Dwyer.
Hello.
Hello, all you co-conspirators of Robin's amazing documentary. Thank you for coming on the show with us.
Lovely to be here.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Now, Robin, you were working on another documentary when this idea of yours sprang to mind to do an 80s horror doc, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So I had just finished a crowdfunding campaign for a documentary called In Search of the Last Action Heroes, which is a feature-length documentary about 80s action movies, which is in production right now. So my producer Ty Singh is actually on a plane right now from London to LA, and he starts filming tomorrow for that project. So that's going to be a hugely exciting film, and I had such a blast putting that together that we finished crowdfunding in July, and I thought, well, what's next that is really going to be exciting and it's going to interest me. And I was looking at the calendar, and I thought, well, Halloween is like the next big event. And so I dived right into it, and it's just been the most fantastic, fun journey. We're having a blast.
That documentary that you were just talking about, Search of the Last Action Hero, that was such a great idea. And I learned about it from the Oliver Harper YouTube channel series. Oliver came on the show about a year ago talking about his YouTube channel, and I've been a strong devotee of most of his videos ever since.
Yeah, absolutely. Ollie's a good friend of mine, and one of the things I do as a sort of pro bono consultancy is I work with creators and a lot of YouTubers, and I help them build their channels and monetize a bit better, because YouTube isn't always, YouTube as a platform isn't always the best way for creators to get enough money to do their best work.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a huge fan of Ollie, and at the beginning of this year we started working quite closely together, and I took him to Comic-Con. I turned his discussion show into a live show. We went and did a tour, and I thought to myself, really, for the sort of content that Ollie does, which is 25 to 40 minute long retrospectives on movies, which are really they're just a wonderful window into these films. It's not the sort of content that YouTube rewards, but if you could extend it into something longer, that was a feature-length documentary, then we'd have something very special. So I started working with him in March, and the project grew very quickly. I was executive producer on that, and I ran the whole campaign, and it was just so much fun. I thought, this is just such a great way to create content for special interest audiences. So with Halloween coming up, it was just the perfect fit, and with everything that I'd learned from that first campaign, I could double up and dive into this one, and it's been, I think everyone would agree it's been a successful journey so far.
Oh yeah, I mean, God, what happened? We got funded in less than a day, correct?
Not quite. It was just over 48 hours.
So okay.
48.
I've been lying to everybody at Rock and Shocks.
Yeah, it it's 48 hours, 31 minutes, I think so. But I was very surprised, actually. I mean, what was great about this campaign is I had enough time to do a proper pre-launch, so we had enough time to get a world-class team of contributors. And if you're talking about 80s horror, there's an expectation that you're going to have 80s horror icons. But I'm just really proud of the advisory team that I was able to put together, because we've got the best people in the world, that are working in the horror industry as part of this project, helping guide it, and that's made such a significant difference. So a lot of things went right from the beginning, and I really think that sometimes in life you work on projects that deserve to be created, and this one certainly does.
And some of those amazing advisors that you have are, again, on the call with us right now, Heather and Jessica. You both have come from rather unique but also very similar horror backgrounds as well. You run the Fangirl
magazine.
Fangirl magazine. Thank you. Okay, I wasn't sure if there was another word after that. It was like Fangirl horror, Fangirl girls, Fangirl blah 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 blah.
Yeah, Fangirl Magazine and Fangirl Radio is the radio broadcast that I've been doing for a long time, and that all started thanks to a little movie called Shaun of the Dead way back when, and I got a bunch of like-minded ladies together, and we started writing, and it kind of just grew, and Simon Pegg was my first actual interview, which was pretty awesome.
Yes, it is, yeah.
What made you want to start that, that you're kind of like your own, as I saw you put it on your Facebook page, your own like network, your own little, your own little niche that wasn't like, you weren't just working for Horror Hound, you weren't just working for Rue Morgue. It was yours.
Well, the thing at the time was there wasn't really a voice for ladies and women in horror at that time. Since then there has been a massive movement, and Heather is one of the icons of that as well. She's just amazing with what she's done with Daily Dead, and but at the time back then there wasn't really that many women being represented in the horror entertainment genre, or for writers or people that were creators. And over the years it's definitely grown, and it's gotten its own month. It's just fantastic. But that's really what started me on it, and it's something that I've always wanted to do. I mean, I grew up watching horror movies. I started watching them when I was like 3 or 4, sneaking into my sister's stash of Tomb of Draculas, and I've just always loved it. And what kind of started it all really was I started writing for Bloody Disgusting as their first fiction reviewer, and that beget Horror Hound, and all of that was gotten from Fangirl, which is still around. We're still recording the radio broadcasts as well, and getting really great interviews, and done a couple of Halloween specials where I've written scripts, and we've had guest stars like Doug Jones and acting with us, which was fantastic.
And by the way, for the 11 years I've been doing this, and even before that, you are the first woman I have ever hear say they read Tomb of Dracula.
Oh my God, yes, Tomb of Dracula, and I hope to God someday we get a movie version of it. But Tomb of Dracula, where Dracula was inspired by Jack Palance, who would go on to play Dracula in a movie by Dan Curtis.
Now, you want to hear a funny story about Marv Wolfman real quick?
Yes, always.
Okay, all right, this is real quick. We won't get too off topic, Robin, don't worry. Because Tomb of Dracula is the 70s, and we shouldn't be talking about anything from the 70s. He told me when he came on my radio show a couple of years ago that he has never, ever seen a Dracula movie, and still to the very day of that interview has never seen a version of Dracula in celluloid. Only read the novel.
That is awesome, actually. Because that Tomb of Dracula is a very unique version of Dracula, and
it's the best version of Dracula.
Yeah, I have a Tomb of Dracula comic poster in my Office that I'm looking at right now. It's the only one I've ever seen, but I thanks to all of that, I met Robin and got on this project as a producer and part of the PR team, and I love it. I love the fact that he's got me on here along with Heather and has a female representation on the project as well, because the 80s genre of horror films, those films in that decade really had a lot of strong women in them. And I think that's going to be an important part of the documentary, along with a lot of the other signs of the times, if you will, that were happening. And we'll talk about that in the documentary, like the nuclear war, threat of that, Reaganomics, all of that, the AIDS crisis. That's what I think is going to really make this stand out, is how we're going to not only talk about the films, but the culture. And that's an important part of it.
You know what we should do when this documentary is over, Jessica? We should do a documentary on horror comics, because there's not one out there.
Funnily enough, our director, David Weiner, is actually was the editor of Famous Monsters of Filmland at the time that I wrote an article for him about horror comics that hadn't been and got published in Famous Monsters.
Oh, but there should be definitely a documentary like this about horror comics, because
I think he's hinting Robin.
Robin. I think, and you got two people right here who are diehard horror comic fans, and God, doesn't horror comics have a freaking history tainted, unfortunately, by politics and stuff? So it could start in the heyday and then go through a dark time, and then obviously the resurgence in the 70s and 80s of the Morbius and stuff like that.
Chris, I think I should be interviewing you. So.
No, but seriously, I would love that to happen one day. But we're not talking about the comic books, because we're not covering comic books in this documentary. There's a lot of stuff that you decided that you're going to excise from this documentary, despite it being in the 80s. Is there a reason why you're sticking just to film only?
Yeah, because you can't.
And by the way, as my boss, I'm not questioning your decisions. I'm just asking a question because you're on my show. Okay, just one.
No, absolutely. Okay. I think it's a really good question. Less is more, right? So there is this editorial battle that rages between being able to do the work justice, and part of that is understanding what to include and what to not include. We can't include everything. I think if you go to the Kickstarter and you look at what we are talking about and what we are covering, it's vast. We're talking about a decade of film history. We can't possibly cover all the films that were in that decade, but we're going to cover the ones that we think are going to be the most relevant for our audience. And that isn't just covering the ones that are the most obvious. And so that's enough. You could do a huge documentary about horror comics. As part of our stretch goals, we are expanding the film. Is now going to have an extended cut, which is going to be over 3 hours long. We're going to cover horror computer games, 80s horror computer games as part of that. We're going to interview more contributors as part of that. So I feel like we're being as exhaustive as possible, while still maintaining a coherent narrative and making something which is entertaining. So when I started this and where I am now with this project is exactly the same place in terms of what I want to achieve. And it's all about making the audience remember and feel what it was like to rent those movies in the 80s. I'm 40 years old. You're probably near my age, Chris. I want to take us back to the point where we discovered this work for the first time. And when you finish watching our film, I want you to go on a 12-hour 1980s VHS movie binge. And that's how I want people to feel. And there's going to be a history. Yes, we're going to contextualize the 80s, but you know what? It's going to be loads of fun. And I think in order to achieve that, we have to make some hard choices. I'll give you a quick story. So this is one of the things, and why I'm so grateful, Chris, that you were involved. Is your input categorically affected how we communicated our vision. So we have, for listeners out there, we have a whole bunch of WhatsApp groups for various activities that have been happening with this project. And in our main advisory group, I was talking about the trailer. And so we had done a teaser trailer, which was about 82 seconds long, and it had been really warmly received. It had about 100,000 views, and people were loving it. But it was very much a montage set to like a hardcore Dance with the Dead track called Riot. And it was like bang, 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 bang. And what I wanted to do when we launched our Kickstarter was do something that was a lot more elaborate, which was more thought through. And Chris put a link to a James Bond montage on our advisory group WhatsApp chat group. And I looked at it and I was like, bang, this is phenomenal. And I'm not even really a James Bond fan, but just how this video was edited, I thought this was phenomenal. So I emailed the editor, and it turned out he'd done it 6 years ago. And I said, look, I just want you to know that a friend of mine shared this with me. I thought it was phenomenal. That's gonna, that your format and the way you've done that is going to inspire us with what we're doing. And I just wrote it thinking nothing of it. And the guy, a guy called Nick Bosworth, replied and said, you know what? I'm a crazy 80s horror movie fan. I love what you're doing. Can I get involved? And we started talking, and I brought him into the project, and he delivered a phenomenal 3.5 minute trailer, which you can see on Kickstarter, which, has been brilliant for our campaign and did exactly what I wanted it to do. It made you remember. It made you nostalgic. It took you back to the first time that you fell in love with this work, and that's what I wanted to achieve.
That trailer is incredibly cut together. The new trailer is just, I've been showing it to people more and more, and at Rock and Shock this weekend. I was really like, you got to see this. This is just, like you asked about the documentary, and a lot of people were just like blown away by like how fluidly the trailer was cut together, and the more so the first song that's used in the background than the second one was a really great touch.
Yeah, I think you can take some bragging rights from that, Chris. You can be like, that wouldn't have happened without me, because it wouldn't have done.
I appreciate that.
I was really happy, and it seems to be working.
Heather, you were the of the three people on here, the one I was not as familiar with until I found out that you worked for Daily Dead, and then I realized I've read a lot of your work. And it was funny that you had posted something recently about like upcoming DVD releases, and one of the films I actually watched this weekend when I was taking a break from conventions was Trick or Treat. But I had no idea the new version of Trick or Treat came out, and Trick or Treat is definitely as much of an 80s homage as you could possibly get for a modern day horror movie.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I feel very fortunate. When Jessica said something about the word icon, I kind of was like, okay, do I need to send her a check for that? Because there's no way that's a thing.
I'll send you my address later.
Excellent. I'm really fortunate that I've been able to find a way to do what I love for a living, and I've been doing it for 11 years now. Because I never thought that was possible. I basically kind of gave up my life in Chicago to move to LA after I got divorced, actually. And I was like, okay, reboot time. And I'm still here, which is kind of amazing because I didn't think I'd be here a year. And now I've, been in a position where I've worked for some of the bigger websites out there. Plus, 5 years ago, I came into Daily Dead, and I mean, this isn't to knock it all to anything, with my boss, because he's amazing, but it was sort of a limited audience that we had at that point. And I feel really fortunate that in 5 years, I've been able to be a part of something that's really grown in a way that I wasn't expecting. And for me, that's been the biggest reward of anything that I've done in my career, is just to be able to build this thing with him and just watch people respond to it, because I've never been a part of that. So yeah, horror has been my life for so long, and I've been writing for just as long as I've loved horror. And somehow one day I was like, hey, I need to kind of change things up in my life. Actually, I do know the moment it was. It was at Flashback Weekend Convention 2007, and I was watching a presentation with Adam Green, who was just getting ready to release Hatchet. And he was talking about taking risks. And he talked about how Dee Snider inspired him to follow his dreams. And something about that conversation just really hit me, especially because I was sitting there with my ex-husband and I was like, oh gosh, okay, I don't think life is what I thought it was going to be. What do I need something for myself, and horror was it. And so like 3 days later, I found an ad on Craigslist for this little website that was starting up called TerrorTube. And I sent him an email. And I'd been writing for like local newspapers and stuff, but you can only write about like new sidewalks and subdivisions for, a few months before it gets like kind of, dumb and boring. Mm-hmm. So I was like, and I sent it out, and Fabian, my first boss, was like, yeah, let's do this. And, I worked there for a year and a half, no pay. I didn't care. I was happy. And it basically led to me financing my own trip to Sundance in 2009, which then led to me being able to go on board over at Dread Central, where I was there for almost 5 years. And then I left there to go and kind of help build this thing for Daily Dead. And I still sit here and I can't even believe my life. I don't. Like every day I feel like someone's going to wake me up and I'm going to be back in Chicago and being in this boring life and being like, wow, I didn't get to do any of the cool things I always thought I would. So I'm really fortunate because I know it's doing what we do, and I'm sure Jessica can attest to this. Like there's just moments where you realize like, wow, all of this is worth it because there's a lot of folks out there who aren't as fortunate. And so for me, I always want to write for those guys who, they love this stuff. And this has been a big part of their lives too. For me, I am a journalist in a sort of a traditional sense, but ultimately I'm a fan. And I never not want to be a fan when I'm writing because I love this genre too much to just turn it into something that's sort of, cut and paste. So that's just been kind of my thing. And then it led to me being able to put out my first book last year called Monster Squads, celebrating the artists behind cinema's most memorable creatures. Rolls right off the tongue. But it was my way. I've always been about telling the stories that haven't always been told. And I've always been really fascinated with the world of special effects. And when I actually first moved out to LA, one of my first office jobs was at a special effects house. So that was kind of cool, like to basically see all these things coming together and being able to do budgets and stuff like that. And I mean, I even got to do some very minimal effect stuff on a few little things. And so I just, but I realized, for as much as we have Fangoria and we had Cinemagic and Cinematech and all these like different publications over the years and, Famous Monsters, like nobody was really diving into people's stories. We were learning about the monsters. We were learning about the process, but nobody was talking to people about what they were going through when they were doing these things and what, personal inspirations came into some of their designs and stuff like that. And that for me was what I was always fascinated with. And I just decided one day, I was like, nobody's done this. Why not? And I didn't think it was going to work. I didn't think anybody was going to say yes. And here I am like 2.5 years later, putting together book 2 for this series. And it's just been incredible. And I feel really fortunate that these folks trusted me with their life stories because they didn't have to. And really just let me put them out in the spotlight in a way that they hadn't before. So it's been really awesome. And again, I'm just kind of like, I look at things sometimes like, oh yeah, I did this. And it doesn't feel real. It still doesn't. And so being able to be a part of this and celebrating what I think is like the best decade of horror, again, is like another pinch me moment where I'm like, wow, this is so surreal. And it's just been incredible to see the online response because I felt like it was going to go well. I didn't realize it was going to go this amazingly well. And I'm so excited to see what the future is. And Robin, I'm just saying, what if we hit 500,000? Can we do like a 10-hour documentary where we give it like an hour to each year? If we can get there, can we get that? Because that's the version I would totally work on. If you want, I'll put in the hour.
If we get 500,000, you can get whatever film you want, Heather. We will.
I had made that suggestion, I think, back in the beginning, saying, hey, why don't we do it like a timeline through the years with in 1980 it was the big election, and then 81 obviously Reagan became president, and then He-Man came out like in 84, you know what I mean, like a timeline, and the Challenger explosion in 85, and in the background of the grayness with the timeline, and every year we actually break up the actors, the directors, all the people that we've got for interviews and stuff into the years that they were most known for. You know what I mean?
That's a really good idea. Look, that's a really good idea, and that's definitely an element of that is definitely on the table. I think that one of the key things that influences any sort of documentary is the contributors. And at the moment we're still bringing great people into the project, and we're only a third through this crowdfunding campaign. We've got some big announcements to make over the next few weeks, which will definitely have an impact on the kind of documentary we make and how we go about formatting it. But definitely, looking at it as a historical timeline, that's something that we're expecting to do, but we're just not going to talk about it too much just yet.
Now, when you're for anyone, we have like a group, so we talk about these things within our group, and we have all these ideas for how the documentaries to be created. So if anyone's wondering how do all these collaborators work together, when we're like throwing ideas at you, are you like, is it something that you love, you're writing down and you're sticking on like a whiteboard and being like, all right, so that's an idea to get back to once we get the money, that's an idea to get back to once we get the money?
It's interesting, right? So I definitely take a lot of inspiration and energy from the group. And one of the things that the group's been amazing for has been when I've had questions, what do you guys think about this? What do you guys think about that? But my job as executive producer is to understand the vision, like what I'm, number one, what am I trying to create? And the second job is to bring the right people on board so we can manifest that and make it the best we can be. So, I never sort of say that's a bad idea or I don't like that idea. I appreciate the creativity, but I also understand the challenges of delivering and making something and getting it out to our backers and getting it out in front of an audience when we say we're going to be able to do that. And so I've made lots of documentaries in the past which have tackled not horror but have had a similar format. So I've got a lot of experience in moving through this process. But this project is really split into two parts. So the filmmaking is the easy part. The hard part is getting the funding. And so we're in sort of massive co-promotion, marketing, fundraising mode at the moment. And it's a very different mode once we switch over to filmmaking. Because with this sort of documentary, one of the biggest challenges is getting the access to the right contributors. And what's wonderful about Kickstarter and the process that we're going through and are in right now is that it's one big marketing campaign. So we're able to together generate enough of a voice to reach the people that we really want to be involved in this. So that's where my head's at. The filmmaking part isn't the part that I'm concerned about, because I know when we get to that point, we'll have the funds, we'll have the capital, we'll have the resource, we'll have the relationships, we'll have the people to create something which is really meaningful and special for the audience. And what's been great about this process again is that we've done a lot of listening. People are talking to me on Twitter, on Instagram every day about what they want, what they're looking forward to. And it's my responsibility to give, to take what they want into account. And that's really come through with our latest set of stretch goals. So the extended cut, the more interviews, the focusing on a few different areas, just making it bigger and better. So your original question was, what's it like when you get loads of people sort of suggesting ideas? That's my happy place. I love it. I think it's amazing. And I consider every one, but I still have to stick to that original vision. When I finished watching this film for the first time, I want to feel inspired in the same way that I felt when I first had the idea.
The what was one of the ideas that I had? What would Jessica and Heather? What were a couple of ideas that you hope we'll see fruition in the documentary? And then Robin can just go,
Jesus. I know that we had talked about with the stretch goals and being able, because there's so much other stuff other than just the films, the things that spun off from the films. And I know one of those was added on was the computer games, because
right.
back in the day, Atari did Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and there was a Halloween one.
Yep.
And the big thing with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was that was one of the first times that you got to be the villain. You were Leatherface running around and chopping up people with that weird flesh-colored chainsaw thing in the game.
I have
I
have both of those games.
Yeah. Oh my God. So don't sell those because
No.
they're worth a lot of money.
And by the way, the toy store I work at, we sell the action figure that's supposed to be the Leatherface from that game. So it's basically the regular Leatherface doll painted green with black hair. In a peach colored face, because that was the Leatherface in the game.
That was it. Yeah.
And he has a green chainsaw too.
That's hilarious. No, see, and that's the kind of stuff that I think is going to be really neat, and it's just going to add just a lot more flavor to the documentary, and make fans just go, I remember that, and it's really going to hit home, because if you look around like my office right now, it's ridiculous. It looks like people call this my toy store. And it's all the things, that's why I would love for us to be able to do stuff about the collectibles that have come back from that time, like with NECA and Mezco, and just I'm not going to mention the unnameable ones that I've been told not to talk about. But the one that everybody owns. But all of those really cool collectibles that have come back, because we're old enough now that we can afford it if you want. And I think that's going to be fun if we get to add that in, thanks to just everybody being so amazingly just supportive of this and giving us the resources to give more back.
Yeah, I'm pretty much excited for the horror soundtracks myself.
Yes.
Because I was a huge movie music nerd when I was a kid, because my best friend's dad worked for the distribution company for WEA, which was Warner Electra Atlantic, back in the 80s. So we had a ton of stuff that would come through her house. So I got to hear a lot of different things through there. And then I had my mom's boyfriend, when I was in 3rd to 5th grade, he also worked at the same place. So, I was getting, I probably wore out the first cassette of the Lost Boys soundtrack.
I
because,
did.
Oh my God, it was so good. And
I got 3 of them.
Yeah. And I couldn't get enough. And I've always been super obsessed with this idea. And I just wish more movies did it, where you had, pop, rock, rap, different music acts coming in and making songs sort of tied into movies. It's such a lost art form that I miss. And I'm such a nerd that this is horribly embarrassing to even admit. But when I was in 5th grade for our talent show, me and my friend Tracy, we reenacted Nightmare on My Street. And
I was gonna say the Fat Boys.
Well, that was Will Smith.
That was Will Smith.
Yeah, that was DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. And we actually got in trouble. Because they thought we were just doing one of his other songs, like Parents Just Don't Understand or something. And they didn't realize it was going to be about Freddy Krueger, and we got in trouble.
Will Smith got in trouble too, because he got sued.
Yeah, but anyway, so I've always been super, super obsessed with music in 80s movies, just because I think was such a great time for that, because it just felt like it was a time when pop culture and horror kind of came together, and then you sort of saw music accept it, and you saw television accept it, and it was just for me it was a really great infiltration of this genre that I love in all these other facets.
I just got to share this with all you guys, by the way. This is slightly irrelevant, but completely 100% relevant to what we're all 4 of us are into, horror. If you're aware of who the author Jack Ketchum was,
Oh yeah.
Rock and Shock was a huge convention for him every year, and at the New England Horror Writers panel and at the writers booth, there was an empty chair with a bottle of Highland Scotch, Jack's picture, and 3 of his books with an empty chair.
Aww.
Oh, that's really nice.
Yeah,
beautiful.
and it kind of made me cry because Jack was one of my most frequent guests on my show. He came on my show probably at 11 years, about 8 of those years, at least once a year. And as much as I would love to have gone to, I unfortunately was not able to attend his memorial dinner, which I was allowed to attend if I could make it out to New York. But this was like in a part of New York that I just didn't know where the hell it was, and I wasn't going to try a New York adventure on a restaurant I've never been to. Yeah, so we're gonna cover movies and music, and then, like I said, we could possibly cover games. What about like merchandising? Are we gonna get into any of that?
Yeah, so just to recap on the soundtrack stuff. So one of our contributors is Spencer Hickman from Death Waltz Records. Death Waltz was acquired by Mondo. We've also got I think Fabio Frizzi's on board. And we'll have probably another announcement over the next couple of weeks just on soundtracks. For merchandising, I'm really excited about it. So the first contributor that I got on board for this project was Ben Scrivens from Fright Rags. And Fright Rags is just like the horror t-shirt company. And love the licenses they get, love the work they do, love his ethos and philosophy around it. And the merchandisers are really important because they're part of this this third group of stakeholders. So if you're contextualizing 1980s horror, you're going to expect to have 80s icons in there, absolutely. And from our point of view, we want to get modern horror greats, people like Lee Whannell, people like Ryan Turek from Blumhouse. I want to get like an Ari Aster or a Jason Wan involved as well to talk about the influence 80s horror had on their work.
Mm-hmm.
But the other group of stakeholders, which is actually, I think, the most important in a lot of ways, I call them the horror influencers. So they include people like Heather, they include Phil Noble Jr. from Fangoria, Michael Gingold, the merchandisers, Ben Scrivens and Fright Rags, Spencer, people who have made a career out of being interested in 80s horror, because, and including YouTubers like Oliver Harper and Cecil from Good Bad Flicks, because those guys and girls represent the bridge between the work and the fan base. It's a very, very powerful link. And so, with the merchandisers, like these are people who have made a career out of something they love, out of an era that is really meaningful to them, because you wouldn't do it otherwise. And that passion and energy is something that I definitely want to explore and bring into the film.
Well, again, if you are interested in the documentary that we were talking about tonight, In Search of Darkness, can be found on Kickstarter. As of the time of recording this, it's currently at 63,000 over 32,000. So we are well on our way to doing some of the awesome bonuses to this amazing documentary. We got 20 days left, so we are still a long ways away from being completed, and I'm looking forward to seeing this in its fruition sometime in the spring of 2019.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's going to be with backers in July 2019. So our production schedule is already pretty well laid out. So there's going to be some production in late November, early December, but the main bulk of production is going to happen in January, February next year, and then we'll roll over into post-production in March and April and June for delivery and manufacturing in July. And July is not when it's going to be released to the public. July is just for backers only.
Okay.
So if you're a backer of the project, that's when you will get sort of early access to the film. And we've got some incredible rewards, some limited edition art from people like Graham Humphreys, who is like a legend, Blu-rays, DVDs, T-shirts, postcards. We kind of got it all, so it's worth having a look and seeing what you can grab.
Absolutely, absolutely. Heather, Jessica, Robin, thank you so much for joining me for my 11th anniversary of Radio of Horror and talking about this fantastic documentary that is just getting started. Actually, it's not, we are like not even in the middle of it. We are still right at the beginning of this race to get this fantastic history lesson out to the fans. That's really what it is. It's a piece of education for not just horror fans, but cinemaphiles as well.
Yeah, I look at it as like a love letter to 80s horror.
Right.
I don't want to create something that's sterile, too factual. I just want it to be kick-ass. I just want it to be like, something you'd watch and it would just infuse you. It would just put that magic back into you, and you will want to go off and have a 12-hour 80s horror movie binge. That's what I want to achieve.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just hope that for me, like, I think all of us being people who grew up loving this, like, clearly this is made for us because, it's all of us kind of infusing our passion into it. But what I actually hope too is that some kid is going to discover this someday and watch it, and it's going to make them fall in love with horror. And that's what I want. Like, as much as I wanted things that like I love being celebrated, being able to sort of pass that torch on to new people, like that for me would be like the coolest thing that this possibly could do.
Definitely.
Yeah, I agree.
Definitely.
I think that it's what's great about this is it's kind of like your primer. It gives you, okay, here's the overview of what you can go into. And then once you get in there, you start digging and you start finding all the really cool stuff, more cool stuff and more cool stuff that aren't as well known, because you're like, well, what happened in that year? Oh, and then you realize, oh my God, look at all these movies. And some of them aren't even on DVD, so good luck to you.
Thank God we got film companies like Arrow and Scream Factory putting out stuff left and right. They have a big influx of like 90s stuff coming out, but they've definitely had some 80s stuff. In fact, we've got like, I think we got Critters finally getting its long overdue respect on Blu-ray.
Yeah, I think didn't they just do a release of an entire series of Critters films?
It's
Is that out
November
yet?
It comes out, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, is it out?
So
or
very
it's-
soon.
Oh, very soon. Okay, very, very soon. Okay, because I know Trick or Treat, the collector's edition, finally just came out, and House on Haunted Hill, but of course that's from '99. But yeah, Critters is the next big like '80s set of films that have kind of been hanging behind. Critters doesn't get as much respect as
Release.
Gremlins. Well, Ghoulies, yeah, but I think Critters was like the end of the '80s, wasn't it?
Oh, Critters was definitely 80s.
Yeah, but the end of the '80s, right? Critters was the response to the Gremlins.
Yeah, all the killer critter things. Yes.
Although I just learned this fun fact. This is interesting to me that apparently the script for Ghoulies was in pre-production before Gremlins even started.
Oh.
So there you go. I had not
Interesting.
known that. I read it on the internet, so it has to be true.
Right.
Yeah.
And Critters is in two genres. It's in horror and it's in sci-fi
And
too.
sci-fi.
Yeah. So possibilities of a sci-fi documentary.
Well, I shall. It would be great to complete the trilogy. So
Yes.
action, horror, and sci-fi. There is just one point, which is, it's very hard to categorize 80s horror because
Yes.
there's like a sci-fi horror.
Yeah.
Is it a sci-fi? Is it a horror? So films that I didn't include were things like Alien and
Life
Predator
Force.
and because they're not what I think of as 80s horror. It's
Yeah.
also why I didn't include, and I got someone on Kickstarter wrote this to me this week and said, "How come you haven't included The Shining? Was this was this deliberate, or was it an oversight?" And for me, The Shining is a Stanley Kubrick film. It's not. It's sort of elevated. It's not what I think of as 80s horror.
Right.
And without wanting to open up a can of worms, it's very hard to defend that point. But there's a certain aesthetic and a certain feeling, and where The Shining is one of my all-time favorite films. I don't think of it as an 80s horror. I think of it as a Stanley Kubrick movie.
Right.
And that's why we included it when we were putting the trailer together. And I think that for the next project that we do, which probably will be 80s sci-fi, I'm going to literally start with an approved list of films. Because what I think is 80s horror and what you might think is 80s horror, they might be slightly different, because there's so much grey area. So I'm sure I'm going to have to defend our selection at some point. But who's not on the show today is Derek Schweigart from 80shorror.net. And he's if you go to 80shorror.net, they've got a brilliant post of like the best 100 movies from the 80s, the best 100 80s horror movies. And like that's my source now. So if anyone gives me a hard time, I'll say, look, go and speak to Derek. He owns 80shorror.net.
Where can people go to find you guys online to your professional social media posts, real quick?
Yeah. Okay. So real quick. So basically, the website is 80shorror.com, and that will redirect you to the Kickstarter.
Yep. And
then across social media, we're at 80shorror.doc. So that's 80s horror.doc.
And Heather and Jessica, you have your own social medias for what you do?
Heather, you want to go first?
Sure. So you can find me over at dailydead.com, and then I only do Twitter because Facebook is evil. And I left like 6 years ago, and I've never been happier. But I'm over on Twitter at The Horror Chick, so it's pretty easy.
Yeah, and I'm on Twitter with the very imaginative handle of @JessicaDwyer. And you can find me on there. You can find me on Facebook, and then you can go to fangirlmag.com and read our posts. We're doing a giveaway right now for the Universal Monsters collection of
Sweet.
Blu-ray. Yeah,
Sweet.
right now. But yeah, we are also on iTunes with Fangirl Radio, and we just had it's going to be being posted this week. Interview talking about 80s horror with Mr. Mark Meir, the voice of Commander Shepard from Mass Effect, and a massive horror geek.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for coming on the show and talking about In Search of Darkness. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Chris.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yes.